Good morning, Sunny Hills Church, and all those visiting from social media. We're glad you're here. Today's devotional sort of launches off of Sunday's sermon, where I talked about how important it is that we fix our eyes on Jesus and some of the things that go wrong when we don't. Today, I want to look at another thing that goes wrong when we don't. In Romans chapter 5, Paul says, "Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God." Justified by faith, we have peace with God. And he just argued in chapter 4, if we're trying to be justified by our performance, by works of law or merit, then we cannot be at peace. And so it has to be by God's grace through faith. But religious people, somehow we end up focusing on performance. We fix our eyes on performance. We become evaluators of each other to try to see who's in and who's out. And that turns into self-righteousness. It turns into judgmentalism and hypocrisy. And so Jesus, he tells us not to do this in Matthew chapter 7, part of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, don't be like this. Excuse me. Because we want to be on Jesus' side. The religious leaders, they had become these performance evaluators to the extent that they decided who's in and who's out, and those people are out and we're in because we got these things right. And when Jesus came, whose side was Jesus on? And I don't mean whose side was he on, like, approving of what they did sort of thing. I don't mean that. I mean, where did Jesus hang out? Where did we find Jesus? Was he hanging out with those who had drawn the lines? Or was he hanging out on the other side of the line? That's where he was. He was with sinners, eating and drinking with them. So much so that the religious people even accused him of being a sinner because he was so connected with the sinners. But that's because Jesus, as he said, he came to save the world, not to condemn it. And so he tries to teach us in Matthew 7 not to do this. He says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment or measure you use, it will be measured to you." And what he's saying is, if you're looking at people and you grab your yardstick and you hold it up to them and you try to see, what they're doing wrong, and you say, well, look, they're messed up. I can see that they're messed up. He said what happens is when you look at them and you see that they're messed up this much, that same yardstick is used on you. Some people think that he's saying that God's going to use that yardstick on you. Why would God use my yardstick? He has his own. So what happens is we end up judging ourselves by this same rule. And the problem is, if I'm judging you condemned because of this much that I can see wrong with you, and then I realize I can only see a tiny bit of what's wrong with you compared to how much I can see that's wrong with me. I may not be able to see everything wrong with me, but I can sure see a whole lot more that's wrong with me than I can see that's wrong with you. And so he goes on to say, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye and pay no attention? I have a speck here, believe it or not. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the log that's in your own eye? Now, can you imagine this? Let's say you had a speck in your eye like this, or even less than this. If I held a speck, you wouldn't be able to see it. But let's say you had this little speck in your eye, and we were in a room, a gathering, and I came, I saw you having a problem with your eye, and I came, bounding across the room with this big old log sticking out of my head, knocking people over, trying to get to you. And I come up to you and I say, hey, I happen to be an expert at getting wood out of eyes. Let me help you with that speck. How ridiculous is that? Jesus has a real sense of humor. It's just ridiculous. You're not going to let me help you because you can see that I have no idea how to get wood out of eyes. And so this is what he's saying. He says, you hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Now, how do I get the log out of my eye? If what I'm looking at, the speck, is your sin, and I'm looking at the log and that's my sin, how do I get that log out? Well, I can't just stop sinning. I mean, I wish I could. The best of Christians want to stop sinning. But even if I were to stop sinning today and never sin again and be completely perfect, be exactly like Jesus, from today on, the log didn't go away. I still committed those sins. I'm still a sinner. The only way that log is going away is if we believe the gospel. If we believe that Jesus bore my sins on the cross. And then we believe that God made him who had no sin to be sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. We have to believe the gospel. And what it does is, it doesn't mean we'll never sin again. It means sin no longer has the power to judge and condemn us. And if we realize that for ourselves, that we are sinners in the process of being saved, if we realize that for ourselves, now we have something different to say to others. We can say to them, Jesus wants you to be saved from the power of your sin to condemn you. So take it to the cross like we did. And so he says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. We want to be able to help, but the only way we can help is if we bring the gospel. If we bring Jesus on the cross and Jesus raised from the dead. And this will help people have peace. As long as we're trying to be performance evaluators, we won't have peace and we won't have a gospel for anybody. But when we lay all that down at the foot of the cross and fix our eyes on Jesus and by faith approach God for the forgiveness and the power of his Holy Spirit, only then can we find peace. God bless you today. Fix your eyes on Jesus. He's the author and finisher of our faith. Bye-bye.